Hey everyone, it's Samuel.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome to Plot Hooks, the podcast where we explore the arts of narrative and collaborative storytelling in the world's premier RPG, Dungeons & Dragons.
Today, in the prime material, Using the Upper Planes in a Story, Part 1.
In the wilds, the classic Mimic.
And in the tavern, what would you do if a stranger shoved something into your hands and then ran away?
Interesting. Well, let's go. All right, Matt, welcome back to the Prime Material.
I'm glad to be back.
And despite the fact that we call this section for the pun value the Prime Material, we're going to be exploring some other planes today. How do we use the upper planes in a story? It's really easy to use the lower planes in D&D's cosmology in a story. You know, having a villain residing in the Nine Hells or the Abyss, those are probably the two outer planes which we interact with the most, with the prevalence of devils and demons entering the prime material plane. But what story elements can we weave in to utilize the upper planes, those good aligned planes in the multiverse? And we'll be exploring that a little bit today. Before we get into that, I'd like to remind everybody to follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. You can find our website associated with our podcast host, Buzzsprout. And you can support us on Patreon as well. And remember, as you follow us on Twitter, when we hit 250 followers, we will be giving away to a random follower a D&D source book or an adventure book, whether or not you want to just begin your collection with the monster manual or a classic dungeon crawl like the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, or whether or not you want the latest Eberron Rising from the Last War. We'll get one over to a lucky follower whenever we hit 250 followers. And we'll have a lot of other cool things coming out on Patreon as well. So, using the upper planes in a story.
Well, I think first, before we get into that, we should probably explain what we mean by these terms for those who just got confused by upper plane, lower plane.
Yeah, there's lots of terms that we use, D&D cosmological terms used right there.
Which, honestly, we really can't get into too deep into the cosmology today, but we'll give a brief overview of what the main planes are so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. It all starts, obviously, in the prime material. The prime material plane, where the majority of your adventures and storytelling takes place. And the prime material is surrounded by all the other planes, and it's where all the elements, matters, and ideologies of the entire multiverse crash together and create the craziness we know as life within Dungeons & Dragons.
Yeah, and this primary existence has two reflections that sort of sit on top of it. And these would be an echo of gray and despair known as the Shadowfell, and the wondrous and strange and yet still dangerous echo known as the Feywild.
Mm-hmm. And then we have the inner planes. These planes envelop the prime material and its reflections. Primarily, these are the four elemental planes, the planes of air, water, fire, and earth. And the prime material plane receives all of its physical matter that makes it up from these concentrations of elemental essence.
But beyond those planes, we have what is known as, unsurprisingly, the outer planes. Whereas the inner planes provides the matter for the rest of the universe, the outer planes are where the various ideologies, philosophies, and thoughts in the cosmos find their purchase. And the main thing that tends to be meant by this is that this is where the classic D&D alignment chart tends to land, where planes will fall along lawful, good, evil, chaotic, and so forth.
Absolutely. And many of the gods reside on these planes. They have their specific little deific realms on these specific planes. And this is, of course, where many mortals go when they die to enjoy or not enjoy their particular afterlives. And these outer planes that are aligned off of the D&D alignment chart with good are called the upper planes. And those that are aligned in some way with evil are called the lower planes. Now, all of this, so much more detailed. We didn't even mention the astral plane, the ethereal plane, the elemental chaos, or the outlands. And some of this information, of course, is based off of your setting as well. But D&D 5th edition did an excellent job of building a very enjoyable and open-ended cosmology. And we'll cover more topics regarding the multiverse down the road, but just this gives us some introduction on what we mean when we say the upper planes. They're these outer planes defined by some sort of good alignment. And in this series, we want to basically explore ways we can utilize these outer planes in our storytelling. It's really easy to have a villain located in the Nine Hells or Gehenna or Hades or something like that. But how do we use these 7 good aligned planes in our storytelling?
For those who don't know, the main upper planes include Arcadia, Mount Celestia, Bytopia, Elysium, the Beastlands, Arborea, and Ysgard. These all explore different aspects of good, and they also fall in different sections upon the alignment chart. And while they're all places of peace or plenty or hope or goodness, they show different aspects of that.
Yes, absolutely. You have ranging all the way from the lawful neutral, lawful good aligned plane of Arcadia all the way down to the chaotic good, chaotic neutral plane of Ysgard. And so, yeah, we just want to explore different ways that we can utilize these outer planes in our storytelling. And what we're going to do today is just throw out a few basic ideas which can be overarching for all 7 of these good aligned planes. And then we're going to go through 2 of them specifically. Each of us picked one. Matt picked Elysium, and I picked Bytopia. And we're going to just go into different ways that we could potentially utilize these specific planes after we go through some general information. So what about using the outer planes just in general?
Well, it's actually interesting. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this was because if you look through the Dungeon Master's Guide, what talks about the different planes, the negative planes have a lot more detail.
Yes.
Because they are inherently planes of conflict, and storytelling is all about conflict and how you resolve it. Whereas the upper planes don't have conflict. So using them, and I'll get into more details of ways you can use them in terms of the conflict for a story when we get into Elysium at least, but using them is more difficult. My initial thought is to use an upper plane as a location for the heroes to recuperate. My first thought here was if you happen to have a campaign that has a lot of jumping around of different planes of existence, for example. Perhaps the home base of the heroes, perhaps a god has drawn them to do a particular quest for him. And so, they're based on Mount Celestia, like they've got a silver palace on the side of Mount Celestia that they go and meet up with the prime good guys. Another way you can use them is as a respite after a particularly grueling adventure. So again, if you're fighting forces from hell, and you've either taken a big loss or you're just beaten down as a party, finding a way for them to move to one of these good planes is a really good breather episode in a series where, and the classic example here is, of course, Rivendell and Lothlorien from Lord of the Rings. Where after they escape the ring wraiths, they go to Rivendell and they have a chance to talk and they meet with other heroes and they discuss what do we do next. It's a great bridge and it's a great staging ground for the next adventure.
It's an opportunity for the party to debrief itself.
Right.
It's an opportunity for the party to interact with each other and talk about perhaps decisions that different party members didn't agree with. Talk about different things that might have been lost, different things which might have occurred. And it's a real just decompressing time for them to use. But it's not without its quest opportunities either. The first thing that came to mind as far as a quest for me is say you have a particular goal in your campaign that you need a very, very powerful divine object to actually succeed. You know that in order to seal this beast that you're trying to combat, you need to get this specific object from Mount Celestia.
Right.
And so you have to go through a mini campaign arc of actually traversing the 7 layers of Mount Celestia to be able to access and gain this particular object. And so while you're not having perhaps as many combat encounters where you're fighting devils and demons, you have different kinds of encounters where you're having to prove yourselves and your goodness and the worthiness of your quest. You could even have some combat encounters in the realm of whenever you're playing Skyrim and you come across the guy at the bridge of Sovngarde who you have to beat in order to prove yourself to actually get across to the Hall of Valor. You could have those types of combat encounters there, and so the upper planes are not without their quest opportunities as well.
Well, and I do think this is a good one thing you don't see a lot of in D&D is what I would call like either proof of merit sort of adventures or safe combats.
Yes.
Because one thing that I really enjoy in TV shows is when you have a character who has to like go through some training.
Yeah.
Avatar: The Last Airbender has a lot of episodes that do this kind of thing, where like these two characters have to go on a quest to learn something, like learn a new ability or gain an item, and they have to prove themselves to the guardians of that. And there's a special sort of fun in watching characters struggle and often fail and then get back up and do it again in a context where death isn't on the line. The gods of Mount Celestia aren't going to kill your party, So it's a rare moment in D&D where you are totally safe, and I think normally that's a detractor in a story. But in the context of your characters have to keep getting back up and keep striving forward, can work really well and tell a really fun adventure.
Absolutely. So with regards to the 2 specific planes that we're going to be discussing today, as a little bit of a precursor, not much has been specified in 5th edition about the specifics of the planes. The Dungeon Master's Guide has a brief summary of each of the planes and in some cases some of their layers. And each of them has a specific optional rule that could be implemented by the Dungeon Master if you happen to be finding yourself there. But a lot more specifics have been published in other editions, especially 3rd edition and perhaps 3.5 as well, just with regards to information on the planes. So some of what we say has not been specifically canonized within 5th edition. We're just going to go over a little bit about the specific planes of Elysium and Bytopia and how to use these specifically in storytelling opportunities. So first up we have Elysium.
The blessed fields of Elysium are aligned with neutral good, and it's an inherently good plane without being fettered to law or disrupted by chaos. It's full of beauty and peace, is a wonderful haven of good, and the DMG describe it as a heaven of well-earned rest. It also has 4 infinite layers, which are not described in 5th edition, but have appeared in earlier editions of the game.
Yeah. The top one, which is the one that we most associate Elysium with, and it seems to be the one that's described in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, is a region called Amoria. It's one of the nicest areas in all the Outer Planes. This is like your classic when you're talking about using something as respite. This is the place to go if you're going to use an Outer Plane as a respite. The beautiful river Oceanus, which flows from the bottom layer all the way up through the other 3, flows alongside many towns built along its coastline. It flows through many beautiful, gentle landscapes. If you're in a story with a setting with Pelor, his godly realm is located here. There's also some rulers of the Gardenals here as well, depending on your edition. Those have not been seen in either 4th or 5th edition. There's no even stat blocks for Cardinals, so not sure how much it's canon anymore. But if you are in a setting where they are present, several of the rulers of the Cardinals are found here on this top layer of Elysium.
The second layer is Eronia, a mountainous layer full of high winds and lightning.
Yeah, and Oceanus runs through this as well, but this is definitely a little bit less peaceful than the top layer of Amoria, but the river Oceanus still runs through here. There are still periods of peace and calm in the middle of this region. The third layer is the layer of Beliren, and it's mostly a misty land of marshes and swamps, interspersed by a few settlements on big rocky outcroppings that rise above the swamps. And this layer is certainly the most interesting for reasons we'll get into here in a little bit.
And after that is Phalasia, is a massive sea, and it's the origin of the river Oceanus, which flows back through all the 3 other layers. The only land masses on this layer are islands.
And so, different ways we could use this plane. This plane, as I mentioned at the beginning, really lends itself to what you mentioned at the beginning of this plane being an area of respite. The Dungeon Master's Guide even says it's a welcome refuge for planar travelers seeking a safe haven. Like that aspect of this plane, and especially if you're essentially just using the top layer, which is really all that's described in 5th edition, it's an excellent place for that. I like the optional rule that's described in the Dungeon Master's Guide called Overwhelming Joy. Visitors spending any amount of time on this plane, it gets hard to leave. And I think there's an interesting way that you could use this plane in that an evil deity actually places people here on this plane in the attempt to actually imprison them there, because they could actually become so enamored with the peace and joy that perhaps they even forget about the quests that they were on to destroy this particular entity, and it becomes a contest of wills and a skill check challenge as the players are actually trying to leave this place to go back to their actual quest location.
Yeah. I really like that rule as well. It's actually the reason why I wanted to talk about Elysium. And that's a really clever way to use it too, where an evil deity manipulates something that's inherently good about this plane. It's so lovely people don't want to leave, but he uses it as a way to imprison people. That's really clever. The notion I had the first thought I had when I saw this rule, and this would be, I think, an interesting story. It's a little grim, perhaps, but I think it could make an interesting campaign, is that it mentions in the Dungeon Master's Guide that people who leave the plane after failing to resist the desire to stay there forever, people who are forcibly removed, always want to go back.
Yeah.
And I thought, what an interesting antagonist it would be for someone who had been on that plane and then was forcibly removed and couldn't get back. And what does that do to someone? And my first thought here was, you have a villain who is so desperate to get back to Elysium that he decides, well, if I can't get back to Elysium, I'll make Elysium here.
Yeah.
And so you have a villain whose goal is complete tranquility at any cost. And, you could take this in a lot of directions. Maybe he's using mind flayers to subdue people. Maybe he's using magic. Maybe he is using magic to draw Elysium into the primary plane, and because of the way he's doing it, it's creating pockets of like people get so serene that like they're not noticing their hands on a stove, right? And they're hurting themselves. Like it would be a very, I think, disturbing story in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I still think it would be a fascinating way to bring in what's supposed to be, again, I think a lot of these ideas we're talking about are, in terms of conflict, the misusing of a good thing.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me a little bit of, for those of you that have watched the anime Naruto Shippuden, where the main goal of Madara Uchiha in that was the infinite Tsukiyomi, where he essentially created peace by literally hypnotizing the entire world. And it was quite an interesting villain, and you actually see, as in other mediums as well, you see these villains that are actually trying to accomplish a quote-unquote good goal through evil means. Even somebody as derelict as Thanos in the Infinity War saga, his goal of destroying half of all life so that life can continue, so that resources would be abundant, is like a really messed up take on a noble goal.
Right. There is a logic to it, in the same way that a villain could see Elysium as being a solution to the problems of the material plane. It's like, well, let's just make everyone happy all the time, and we'll all be good. And seeing, like with Thanos, seeing the disturbing consequences of what actually happens when you play that out. But again, it's actually a sympathetic goal, so you could have a lot of interesting dynamics of NPCs perhaps who are maybe at odds with the party because like, well, no, we want peace, we like this guy, and that creates, I think, a really dynamic story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. One final thing that you could do with Elysium is if you did want to include all 4 layers as described in the other editions, that third layer we mentioned previously, it's rumored to actually be a prison for a few very powerful beings, and from the information that I found, that's never specified what it is. It's just literally rumored to be a prison for powerful beings. The Cardinals actually have to fight off evil things here at times in this neutral, good, aligned plane, because presumably because there's these entities that are imprisoned here. I saw one that mentioned something about a legendary Hydra potentially being sealed here. But if you did want to take that aspect of Elysium, or even not use all 4 layers, but maybe just make it a 2-layer plane, having this good aligned plane become corrupted, or perhaps even this entity, whoever you decide it may be in your particular setting, breaking free or adversely affecting this good place by result of being imprisoned here for millennia, is also an interesting idea for a collaborative storytelling effort.
Yeah, and one last thought on how you might be able to use this legendary monster idea is we talked about earlier how maybe people have to go to a good aligned plane to find a particular item. Well, maybe the solution to the problem you're having in the material plane is you require I don't know, the eye of this legendary Hydra to be used to forge a weapon or something. And it's like, well, we know where it is. Yeah. You have to travel there. You have to talk to the gods of Elysium. They have to give you the okay to get to the thing, and then you have to have a fight. Like you can. It's as you're going by, the angels guarding this thing are like, "Good luck, buddy." Yeah.
Yeah. What was it? I haven't actually played the game, but in God of War 4 or just God of War. Freya sends Kratos to the Norse mythology version of the underworld, Helheim, and in order to save his son, he has to get the heart of a specific creature.
Yeah,
and so he has to make this whole trek to this other quote unquote plane of existence within that mythology,
right,
in order to retrieve the object from this creature.
Yeah. So go up to Elysium and kill the legendary Hydra and get its heart to resolve whatever problem you've got going on. That's a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. For the second plane that we wanted to cover today of these good aligned outer planes is Bytopia. And the twin paradises of Bytopia are aligned at the union of neutral good and lawful good. So kind of halfway between Elysium and Mount Celestia. This plane is inherently good and accepts law and order when necessary. This plane also has 2 infinite layers, which uniquely face each other, almost like the inside of a taco or the inside. People always use the illustration of the inside of a book, but I like tacos.
No, I prefer taco. This is the taco plane.
And so, but one side, but they literally actually face each other. So on a clear day, when the skies are clear, you can look up and see the other plane above you. The planes are joined by the occasional mountain, which is reached high enough to touch the landscapes and the mountains on the other side. And you can go between the 2 layers by either climbing one of those mountains or by flying. And once you cross the midpoint between those 2 planes, gravity instantly shifts to match that of the other side. One of the layers is a much more tamed, serene layer called Dothian. That is more so the part of the plane which is closer to the lawful good end of the spectrum. The other side is a more untamed land, still a good land, but wilder, sending more towards the neutral good side of the spectrum. That side is called Shuruk. Here, in some editions, we see that many members of the gnomish pantheon actually exist here, and many gnomes find their afterlife here as well. Garl Glitterfold is the chief gnomish deity, and he finds his purchase here in the Dothian side of Bytopia. The Dungeon Master's Guide calls this the heaven of productive work, the satisfaction of a job well done. And as such, honest and hard-working folk like farmers and artisans and merchants enjoy their afterlife here alongside primarily those of gnomes. Enjoy their afterlife here, mostly on the more inhabited Dothian, but Shuruk is not without inhabitants either. That even houses a gnomish underground mining city called Quarry, which is heavily involved in the crafts of gem cutting and stone cutting. So what do you think we could maybe use for this plane?
My first thought here is actually, and I know you said that the space between the 2 planes, the gravity shifts instantly.
Yeah.
If I were to run this, my first thought is this plane as spectacle and setting. Not necessarily an immediate story to me comes out of this plane, but I think it would be a great place to set a scene or an encounter. Which I would actually change this a little bit, where instead of the gravity being instantly changed, there's a band where the gravity is shifting and inconsistent.
Yeah.
And this is a gnomish city, so what you could have, this thought just came to me and I love it, is having a floating settlement between the 2, like a building that floats in the air and the gravity shifts sometimes, and it's full of gnomish contraptions, and airships travel up and go to one place and then and down from the other, and it's this sort of like I almost see it as a floating port or tavern that is drifting between these 2 planes.
Sounds almost like utopian steampunk.
Yes. And I just see this would be a great place for, like, there's some gnomish interdimensional traveler who the party has to find. It's like, well, you can fly him at the spinning cauldron or whatever you want to name this place.
Absolutely.
And you have to go there, and maybe he's hiding from someone. You know, you can do the story however you want. But as a setting, a sort of floating, turning, ever-turning, gnomish Rube Goldberg machine of a tavern that floats between the two planes of Bytopia, I think could just be a really fun place to visit.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that idea of finding a specific gnomish individual. Gnomes are so intertwined, it would seem, with this particular plane, at least in older editions, that I think that would be an excellent place to take this particular plane, needing to find someone, or perhaps even connecting with the background or past of a gnome in your party. Perhaps he has to go travel. Maybe he needs to go talk to one of his ancestors and seeks the soul of this gnomish commoner that is just hanging out on Dothian for all eternity. You know, next to the entrance to the deific plane of Garl Glitterfold. You know, it's a really interesting possibility. Yeah. All right, well, you ready to head over to the wilds? Leave Garl Glittergold and head over to the wilds?
Yeah, let's get going.
All right. We're here in the wilds. The Mimic. Classic.
Yeah, it's a very old D&D creature. Goes all the way back to the very first Monster Manual in 1977. And have been in every edition in some capacity.
Yeah, absolutely iconic D&D creatures. Even those who've never encountered them know what a mimic is, genuinely.
Yeah, well, they've also kind of billowed out into more popular consciousness. Like, you know, there are mimics in Dark Souls, for example. You know, so they've definitely ballooned outside of their D&D roots.
Yeah.
But, well, that's what kind of the getting into how to use a mimic and what you can use them for. One of the perils of them is using them too much.
Yeah.
People are going to be shooting arrows into every chest they come across.
Yeah.
Out of fear that it's going to try to eat them later, you know? So it's a monster you have to use carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I think probably they're best used not as chests. And if they are used as a chest, used as a really inconspicuous chest or a chest in a room full of boxes and crates and such like this,
right,
in areas where it's not obvious that it is something that is dangerous or nefarious. They're best as surprise ambush creatures, I think.
Right. Well, that's and that's you kind of have to remember what they actually do is that they become objects that creatures will approach unassumingly.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
They're classically chests because, well, let's be honest, the creators of D&D were trying to shock and surprise their players who were so used to going up and opening up chests that they didn't think of it. Yeah. So, but a mimic as a creature is going to adapt to whatever environment it's in order to catch any sort of prey.
Yeah, I think it can take the form of any inanimate object, right? That within a certain size. Yeah, I think in some older editions there was a really giant one that could be a house. But as far as what we have here in 5th edition is a mimic is a medium monstrosity, and I would play that as it can be any sort of medium-sized inanimate object, whether that be the classics of the door or the chest, or perhaps you could do something else along those lines.
Yeah, I have a few ideas with mimics. The one thing I find really interesting is this description, and at the end of its entry in the Monster Manual, where it says, mimics live and hunt alone. Although most mimics have only predatory intelligence, a rare few evolve greater cunning and the ability to carry on a simple conversation in common or undercommon. Such mimics might allow safe passage through their domains or provide useful information in exchange for food.
Interesting.
See, that it's a fascinating concept. I think the Monster Manual picks the most boring way you could use the idea of an intelligent mimic, though. It's like, yeah, sure, you could get information about the dungeon, What's far more interesting to me is using an intelligent mimic as an NPC in other contexts.
Absolutely.
The first thing that came to mind is like, let's say you're running a campaign in a more urban sort of environment. And you're dealing with cities and thieves guilds. What if the right-hand man of the leader of the thieves guild is a mimic?
Yeah, that's interesting.
One thing I've found running games is that if you create a visually or conceptually interesting character, your players will latch on to them.
Absolutely.
If they don't adopt them, name them, and bring them into their, home in the process. But they will remember a thieves guild whose right-hand man who's dropping clues for them in the marketplace. It's like, meet me at so-and-so, if that clue is being dropped from a lamppost, right? That is whispering to them in Undercommon. Like, that's really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. People think that because of their stationary status is they can't move around. They can. They just they move around to a place where they can get food and then sit there as this inanimate object. That does not mean that they can't move. They have to move to actually get where they were in the first place.
Right.
And they can provide some really interesting roleplay encounters if they actually are intelligent. I don't think they ever get actually really intelligent. I think the level of intelligence I picture is the Easter Island head in Not in a Museum. Like it's not like smart, but it's intelligent enough to speak.
Well, and this is actually something that's great about D&D is you can play it in multiple ways.
Absolutely,
So if he's a right-hand man who's just like, he's like, boss says let you through, boss says eat you, kind of level of intelligence, that's really funny and great. I think in earlier editions, and I haven't researched this, I haven't checked, but I heard this, that earlier editions, they actually had human-level intelligence.
Ah, interesting.
So you could take it that route, and like just imagine, like, again, you're dealing with, like, I keep going back to a lamppost, or a small fountain, or something, or a statue, and it starts, like, barking at you in, like, a Cockney accent of, like, hey, what's going on, like, whatever. Like, that's really funny to me as a concept of a recurring NPC.
Yeah. I've never considered that, but that is this idea of using a mimic, an intelligent mimic, is really intriguing and can add a really nice flavor to a campaign. It's just one of those things like making a really interesting shopkeep or something that just adds flavor to your world, makes your world unique, and really helps with the storytelling opportunities, because that story, even if that mimic turns out to not be anybody important that they never come across again, the story of that session is going to be a memorable one for PCs and DMs. As far as using them as actual hunters, what are some objects that are maybe out of the norm that we could perhaps have them transform into?
I mean, as long as I guess one question would be, this would be a ruling you'd have to make as a DM, what's the size limitation, not only in terms of how large they can go, but like how small can they go? Like, is that mug of ale on the counter gonna eat your hand, right? But yeah, because if you're okay with them becoming smaller than medium, then you can have literally anything. I saw a meme once, I think, that said, put a chest in a room, but make every object except the chest in that room a mimic. Just to mess with your players.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of a door is the more so than the chest, I think, is the classic one that really makes sense, because adventurers can skip chests. They can roll terrible perception checks and not notice chests. They can skip the room with the chest in. But having a mimic be a door in a place with only one entrance or exit, where the adventurers have to actually go through, can make an interesting and surprising storytelling opportunity where all of a sudden you try to go into the door, and of course their special ability where you touch them and they adhere to you, and all of a sudden initiative is rolled when perhaps not even all of the party is even trying right there and trying to go through the door at the particular moment.
Well, and again, that's actually I don't know why I never thought of using a mimic as a door. That's a really great way to use them. Another could be, and this is something a little bit different from your standard dungeon. Well, you could also be in a dungeon, depending on the type and the style of it. But is have them as a rug or a carpet. They'll walk right over it, and then you have it attacking from beneath them. Yeah.
Well, one of the interesting things about mimics specifically is that perception checks don't even work.
Oh, right.
Because of their special ability whenever they're in their object form of false appearance. As long as they're not moving, they are indistinguishable from the ordinary object, which to me it makes them much more interesting to use as ambush predators, because even a wary player character going into a room is not going to be able to, even on a natural 20, detect something that is actually off about this particular object, unless they were to actually touch it and interact with it. Another option for using mimics is using them as basic, not just chests, but basic crates and boxes. They're, I think, a really good denizen of a shipwreck. They can't be underwater because they do require food and air. They are, despite the fact that they can transform into inanimate objects, they do actually need to breathe. But in terms of like a ship that's run aground or something, an interesting obstacle that or an encounter opportunity where your party is just traveling along a coastline and comes across this derelict shipwreck, that's an interesting opportunity for the mimic to show up in an instance like that. They're so versatile because you can pop them in pretty much anywhere. But again, as you mentioned at the beginning, they have to be used sparingly, because otherwise it will really bog down your storytelling instead of actually creating an interesting encounter.
Right. You really want to, I don't know what the math would be, but I feel like there's got to be an equation of how many mimics per number of sessions you're allowed to use before your players get completely paranoid.
Yes, absolutely.
Because they will be for the next 2 sessions after you drop one at minimum. They're going to be kicking and hitting every chest and paranoid of every object. So you have to give enough time for them to forget before you drop it again.
Absolutely. All right, were you ready to head over to the tavern?
Let's go to the tavern.
All right. All right, back in the friendly confines of the tavern, away from all those creepy chests and lanterns and crates and such.
I will admit I'm a little suspect about my mug, but we'll seal it out.
All right, well, let's see if we can go here. Maybe this thing that the person's going to shove in your hand is a mimic. I don't know. That's all right. But what's the plot hook we're going over today?
Today's plot hook, as you said, is what do you do when someone shoves something into your hands and runs away?
This is inspired a little bit about a couple different things which we were talking about before we actually went on the air. One is I'm a very, very big player of Skyrim, and there's a hilarious random encounter you can have where a thief will suddenly come up to you and give you a random weapon that he stole and then run away, and then shortly thereafter there'll be someone coming behind him who's chasing him, and you'll have a few different opportunities of what to do. And you also had another thought behind why this is why this could be an interesting encounter.
Yeah, well, because like you said, it could be an object, and you could do lots lots of things with that. Or, and this is a game I want to run at some point, someone runs up and shoves a child into someone's arms and then runs away, which then leaves a party of probably, battle-hard adventurers suddenly with a baby to take care of while they figured out why it was given to them.
Yeah, and you're that kind of in the realm of the Mandalorian.
Yeah,
and in some of the things that happen with there, without going into any spoilers or anything for that show on Disney Plus if people have not yet seen it. But yeah, that's a really interesting idea. The idea of it being an object, you can have it being the sort of thing where a thief is trying to pawn it off, and that can create an interesting encounter with the person who's actually pursuing the item. If they start using the item, perhaps they then come across at a later date the person the item actually belongs to while they're in use of it. They could actually be accused of the crime. They could also just be given an object by someone to disguise as well. If their party is at a high enough level, perhaps they've caught the eye of a dragon who walks around in humanoid form, as those often do, or some other being that disguises itself as some form of humanoid and gives them some sort of object and watches them, or perhaps even a nefarious entity gives them some sort of object that is cursed, a cursed weapon or something like that, which actually begins to siphon away at their soul or at their essence or at their strength as they're beginning to use it in combat or in their interactions.
Yeah, it was actually, when you mentioned that it could be a nefarious being, my first thought would be this is a great way to have an antagonist interact with your characters at a distance, is have one of his minions, bump into somebody and drop a ring into their pocket or hand them a ring or something like that, except there's a location spell on the ring, and so he knows where that ring is at all times, or it's cursed, so he's, siphoning away at their willpower or what have you.
Interesting,
and all of a sudden maybe you have a character who's rolling at disadvantage and, he's trying to figure out why, and he could feel a magical entity essence on him, but he doesn't know the source. And that's something a character will probably figure out relatively quickly.
Yeah.
But it's a good way to maybe remind your players, like, oh yeah, someone's out to get you, someone's messing with you, someone's trying to wear you down.
Absolutely. And with an actual being, whether it be a actual child or someone like a pet or something, an actual being being just given to you randomly with the command, here, protect this with your life. That would be a really interesting. You need the right party to do it with.
Yes, of course.
But that would be a really interesting storyline to go down. They would have to be careful as far as different combat encounters. It would change the way that they role played as they just try to track down exactly what the heck just happened. It's one of those things which I think makes for a great 1 or 2 episode arc, where it's not something where they're having to drag the child through dangerous areas for long amounts of time, but where it's something that just can create a really interesting story encounter for it.
Yeah, because I think you could have a really interesting story. I think there's an old Akira Kurosawa film called Cub and Wolf, where a samurai is basically, this situation happens to him and he's entrusted with this child, so you have this really world-weary soldier protecting this young child as he travels through Japan, trying to get him wherever he's going.
Yeah.
But so you could have a campaign based around this concept, but as a plot hook for a couple of sessions, I think it could be a really fun change of pace, where a party that is used to diving into danger without a second thought is suddenly like, oh wait, no, the paladin has a baby strapped to his chest. Like he can't go charging into this thing,
And it can even be a hook for the rest of the adventure. Like, why did this person do this?
Right.
Is there something in the nearby town that's going on which is evil, which is causing this person to either go insane and give their child away, or out of simple paternal instincts give their child away to try to protect them, and then run back to try to save their spouse or the rest of their family? It could be a lead-in into a heroic encounter of trying to figure out why this happened,
right,
and what can we do to make it better and to return everything back to normal.
Right, and you're kind of given an inherent clue, too, with that. Because it's like, why this child? Whose is it? Why was it in danger? There's a natural line of questioning that your party will follow that will very easily lead into a larger adventure.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent plot hook to consider. But with that, I think we're going to wrap up the episode. Thanks again from all of us at Plot Hooks for listening, for me, Samuel, and for Matt, and Dave, and Steve, and Zach, and Becca, and podcast pupper Ellie. We'll see you again next week with another episode of Plot Hooks.